Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating, highly confident, and honestly pretty contrarian midterm prediction from a recent video by the channel Rich Does Politics. We're going to dive right in and neutrally unpack exactly what this creator is arguing and step by step how they arrive at their forecast. The creator over there kicks things off with a massive question. What if the assumptions driving all the political panic right now are just entirely wrong? Like, what if the conventional wisdom we are constantly hearing about the upcoming midterms is completely backwards?
So here's the agenda for how this argument breaks down into 6 main pillars. First, defying the mainstream narrative. Second, the redistricting math advantage. Third, the domestic policy pivot. Fourth, Main Street voter priorities. Fifth, altering the election mechanics. And finally, number 6, the final contrarian prediction.
Okay, let's start with pillar number 1, defying the mainstream narrative.
You know how most commentators assume that a crumbling economy and expensive oil will naturally sink the GOP? Well, this prediction forecasts the exact opposite. They are calling for a massive Republican victory to hold the House. The whole argument here is that these mainstream expectations are literally ignoring the underlying structural data.
Which brings us to pillar 2, the redistricting math advantage.
This is where it gets interesting. The argument heavily hinges on Supreme Court forced redistricting in specific states. We're talking Tennessee, Virginia, Alabama, Louisiana, Florida, and Texas. The creator points out that this redrawn map has drastically altered the political landscape. I mean, it even prompted an 8-term Democratic congressman in Tennessee to just drop out of the race completely.
So, if you look at the creator's math, this redistricting creates a massive, built-in advantage of anywhere from 9 to 12 seats over the 2024 map. To put that into perspective, in this view, Democrats are essentially forced to play a steep game of catch-up before a single ballot is even cast.
And to back up this mathematical advantage, the source points to some pretty stark numbers. They claim Democratic fundraising is severely lagging right now, down 10 to 1 actually. Plus, the creator completely rejects the popular idea that America is an evenly divided 50-50 country. Instead, they argue the nation actually leans heavily conservative, with a 65 to 35 split.
Moving right along to pillar 3, the domestic policy pivot.
The source predicts a very specific, almost strategic timeline here. It starts with decisive military action against Iran, specifically targeting Karg Island, or the IRGC, around mid-May. But then, a sharp pivot. By late spring, they foresee an abrupt ramp down of foreign policy. That's followed by a massive summer ramp-up of domestic rebuilding efforts, and it all culminates in a huge political convention in September.
To give you an idea of what this domestic focus looks like, the creator cites reports of RFK shutting down roughly 6,000 fraudulent hospice accounts. The claim is that these accounts were billing $6,000 a week in a massive money laundering scheme. The argument is that aggressively clawing back this exact kind of systemic, institutional waste is precisely what voters want to see right now. All right, that leads perfectly into pillar 4, Main Street voter priorities.
Distancing themselves from the political insiders and online commentators, the creator insists that normal, everyday Americans really aren't consumed by all this midterm panic. Instead, as the quote goes, they're watching their kids play t-ball, they're planning summer vacations, they're just grounded in their immediate everyday lives, you know?
In fact, the creator completely dismisses what they call City of London-style media fears, things like returning lockdowns or intentional market crashes. Instead, they argue that everyday voters out in rural areas are highly pragmatic. They are actually willing to tolerate $4 gas as long as leadership is actively rooting out that institutional corruption we just talked about.
Let's look at pillar 5, altering the election mechanics.
The source posits that the 2020 election system, with all of its extended mail-in voting, suffered from a 5 to 15% insecurity rate. So what's the countermeasure? Well, they point to a strict return to a single election day, and they argue this is being forced by recent Supreme Court actions to tighten overall security and completely eliminate those extended voting windows.
Florida is held up here as the ultimate proof of concept. The argument is that once Governor Ron DeSantis eliminated local corruption in places like Broward County, specifically by implementing secure paper ballot tracking, the state literally shifted from a purple toss-up into a solid +9 conservative stronghold.
And to highlight the sheer frustration with voting delays in other parts of the U.S., the creator brings up a wild comparison. India manages to count 1 billion votes in just 24 hours. They use this point to argue that prolonged vote counting in America is entirely unnecessary, and really, it just breeds distrust. Which finally brings us to pillar 6, the final contrarian prediction.
By blending together all of this, the redistricting math, a sudden pivot to domestic issues, and these sweeping mechanical voting changes, this forecast leaves us with a really compelling question. Are the old rules of predicting elections completely obsolete? If traditional barometers like gas prices and economic anxiety no longer decide modern elections, does this math-driven perspective completely change how you view the midterms?